Got a nice crowd tonight here in person and on Zoom. And I am grateful for the miracles of modern technology that allow us to gather all across America. What is this course about and what is it not about? Okay, so we talked about, the course is called Meditation from Sinai. Meditation from Sinai means that it is a particular practice of meditation that is from Sinai, that is of a Jewish nature, from the Jewish tradition. And I must tell you that people asked me in preparation of this course, and actually, interestingly enough, it wasn't even in preparation for this course. The first time I got asked this question, I spoke to a person who practices meditation regularly, and they said to me, do you meditate? I guess they felt that, in our conversation, it appeared that I was practiced in this style of being. And I said, no, I don't meditate. And then over time, as I began to learn more about meditation in the context of this course, I realized that actually, while I don't meditate, I do meditate. And I meditate, and the thing is that many of us, what I want to accomplish tonight is I want to direct our attention to the Jewish practice of meditation that we engage in with, and to do so more mindfully and more intentionally. So we start off in the Jewish way with a story. Two old friends meet for dinner. How's that husband of yours? Sadie says to Margaret. Oh, is he still unemployed? Margaret says, no, not anymore. Well, that's good news. What does he do? Now he meditates. Oh, says Sadie, that's better than doing nothing all day. But so let's say, first of all, there are three general classes of meditation that we could consider, and then we'll talk about what meditation actually is in our context. So the three classes of meditation are meditation as part of ritual worship, that is meditation as part of religious worship that isn't Jewish. So people who use their practices in which mantras are used, which are either names of deities or phrases of teaching from a religious tradition, or contemplating on a statue, burning incense, and these types of things. So we're not talking about that. There is mindfulness meditation, which is the practices of meditation without the religious connotations. Okay, and that has been helpful to many people and is even used in psychotherapeutic practices. We're not talking about that, although some of what we will talk about will overlap with that. What we're talking about today is a different orientation of thinking, engaging Jewish teaching to change the way we look at the world. The idea is here to engage our mind to change the way we experience the world. Okay. Just for those of us who are curious about how I could assert that there is a Jewish practice of meditation. Those of us who, like me, were raised in the mainstream Orthodox Jewish world. I didn't grow up going to Hasidic schools. Never heard of this idea of meditation. But actually, if we look in Medrash Talpiot, if you have the textbook, it's on page 3. text number 1. Notice that all there, before doctor and lawyer, there was a particularly Jewish profession. Does anybody know what it was? Before doctor, lawyer, and accountant, what was a Jewish profession?
You mean in the time of our forefathers?
Yeah, what was the Jewish profession? Shepherds. That was the quintessential Jewish profession. You imagine today, 2 Jewish women meet. My son, the shepherd. Oh yeah, brach.
So did they choose to be a shepherd
Oh,
so they could have
Medrash Talpiot, look, text 1. You could read with me. Our patriarchs, our ancestors chose to be shepherds so that they could be alone in the wilderness where the air is clean and pure, and they would be far from other people for the sake of secluding themselves in divine meditation. And you read the Hebrew text, Kedei lehisboded atzmam, be'inyan elokus, to engage in divine meditation. Okay. Now, so this is kind of a general, yes.
I'm sorry, Breslov, they're doing his Badadut, actually. They have a very, like up to an hour a day.
Right. So today we're going to start with some very basic ideas, the foundation, the basics, and hopefully we'll build on it from week to week. Another place that meditation is central to Jewish life is prayer, as many of us have said. But before we talk about prayer, I just want to ask by a show of hands on the Zoom, you can make a hand, or in real life, you can make a hand. Have you ever meditated? So we got a few.
Yes.
Okay, good. So we have for some of you, this might be kind of basic, and hopefully it'll be interesting to see some of the parallels in Jewish practice. Okay, so we mentioned prayer as a meditative practice. And I want to say, lest you suggest that I'm making this up, that prayer is about the correct reading of Hebrew words, which for many of us it is. What is the word prayer? If you look in page 4, figure 1.1, the word prayer in Hebrew is Tephila. And the word Tephila can be translated in 2 ways. And both of those translations represent different approaches to meditation from Sinai. One is the idea of Tephila as sitting in judgment. Now, here we have a problem with translation and English. When we say judgment, we have a negative association with the word judgment. In Jewish teaching, the word judge, actually, another name for the word judge is Elohim. The name for God and the name for a judge is synonymous. And it's interesting also that the word Tephila and Pelila are synonyms for prayer and judgment. How can prayer be judgment? Why is a judge synonymous with God? Because the purpose of a judge is to identify reality in its truth. To identify reality. Now, humans are fundamentally unable to identify all of reality. We are limited. But the aspiration of the judge is to correctly assess reality. And so lihit palel means to correctly assess my own reality. To sit not in judgment of myself, but in introspection of myself. To check out what's going on with me. Okay, that's Tephila. And the other translation of the word Tephila relates to the word hatofel, to glue, to attach. And the idea is that when I pray, when I engage in Tephila more correctly, because actually the word prayer is a misnomer. The word pray means to ask for something. And most of our prayers, 95% of our prayer, is not asking for anything. And so instead what we're doing is we are gluing ourselves, we're attaching ourselves to the divine reality. So the two ideas of prayer, one is checking out what's going on within ourselves, and the other is trying to become aware, to attach ourselves to the divine reality. Now, I also want to demonstrate an important aspect of our form in prayer, to be aware of how being in the synagogue is similar to the practice of meditation. And I want to take also a step back and just acknowledge that there are two dimensions to what we have to talk about. One is the practice of meditation, and the other is, what am I meditating on? Okay, so there isn't a lot of explicit Jewish teaching on the practice of meditation. How do I go about meditating? It's there, but it's not explicit, and I'm going to point to a couple of things. But there is an abundance of Jewish teaching for things to meditate on. Judaism is so rich with ideas that one can contemplate. So an example of the practice of meditation in Jewish teaching is something that we take for granted and actually we get confused about a lot. And that is, are we supposed to sit or stand in the synagogue? Are we supposed to sit or stand in the synagogue? And you might notice that the most sacred of the prayers, besides for the Amidah, is the Shema. And in the traditional synagogue, the Shema is always recited sitting down. In the traditional synagogue, the Shema is recited sitting down. Why would we say, now in the more modern and creative congregations where they're modifying the traditions, it has become popular to stand for the Shema. And it makes sense why you would do that, because the Shema is such a holy prayer. So this congregation, please rise and recite in unison, Shema Yisrael. Right? It as Rabbi Gans of blessed memory would say, it's much more effective that way. But the reason that we sit is because Shema is a meditation. And when we meditate, we should sit. We don't sit in the lotus position. Even people who teach meditation today don't recommend to beginners to sit in the lotus position because it's uncomfortable and it distracts your mind. Okay. So the first step in any meditation is making sure that our body is comfortable. Okay. So we sit in a comfortable pose, in a comfortable position, relaxing our body. The second thing is that we have to remove distractions. Okay. So before this is true for learning Torah in general, and also for any kind of meditative practice. We want to think about, as we sit comfortably, we pause for a moment and notice what's going on with ourselves. And we begin to become aware, what's bothering me? Am I okay? Am I ready?
The energy always goes to the weakest link, so you're always aware.
So what'll come up immediately is, I have an itch, I'm hungry, there's something going on. So sometimes we have to attend to those. We'll talk today about how we might attend to them. But here's another practice, and this is particularly a Hasidic practice, quite a controversial one. And that was to make sure always to eat something before davening. So it's controversial because the Talmudic teaching says, Lo sochlu al hadam, you should not eat before prayer. However, halacha permits, Jewish law permits, that if one is uncomfortable, if one is ill, if one is weak, they may eat before prayer. And the Rebbe said, a previous Rebbe said, it is far better that a person eat in order to pray well than a person pray quickly in order to be able to eat. Right? So this practice of, okay, if you don't want to eat a piece of cake, a mezainis or something like that, at least drink something. If that's going to be a distraction for you, then you shouldn't do that. Now, there are people who prefer to pray on an empty stomach because they're more alert when they're hungry. That's also something that we have to know ourselves. And we have to check out what's going on with ourselves. So these, I think, are two examples of the practice of meditation that we do in order to, these are kind of practices aside from what we're actually meditating on. And we have another example of this in a text in the Mishnah, in the traditional teaching of Mishnah. This is text 2, page 5. Ein omdim lihispalel ela mitoch koved rosh. One must approach prayer with reverence. Okay, so there's another teaching about koved rosh, entering into a state of mind that's focused and reverent and mindful about the sanctity of what we're about to engage in. And now the Mishnah goes on to give a prime example of how this was practiced. Chasidim Harishonim, the early pious sages, Hayushohim, Shah Achas Umispalalim, they would pause for an hour or for a time and pray. The Talmud goes on to say that it was explicitly an hour. Kedei sheyachavnu es libam lamakom, so that they could focus their hearts on God. And then they would pray. So they would spend time, they would pause, directing their heart before, right? So that's again, this very similar to what we would think of as meditation. And only then would they enter into prayer. John, no thoughts? Okay, any questions, comments before we continue? Yeah, okay. How am I doing, guys? It's so hard. I wanted to say it's a bit of a challenge on Zoom. Thank you, Esther. It's a bit of a challenge on Zoom because, you know, in real time, I can see some of our participants here. I can see your verbal, your eyes, your body language. I can tell if you're with me. And on the Zoom, it's a little harder. The squares are so small, Nabach. And so, you know, thank you for the thumbs up and all that. So yeah, if you when I pause for questions, it's not just do you have any questions? It's please, I'd like to hear what's going on with you and how this is how you're receiving it.
Put them on the giant screen, then we can see them too.
Yeah.
And it would be a more cohesive class of us ripping them.
It's too much work. Thank you, Cindy, for the suggestion.
That's just my thought too.
Okay, let's continue. So let's think about what I just want to now just give a general overview of the 6 weeks that we'll be learning together. And just give us a 10,000-mile view of what we hope to accomplish over the next 6 weeks. So there are three terms that we find in Jewish teaching that allude to the idea of meditation, mindfulness, thoughtful orientation. One is hispodidus, which we mentioned before, which is seclusion, kind of transcendent, not transcendental meditation, which is pretty controversial, but a meditation that involves transcending, stepping outside of the normal. Then there is hisbonenut, which is contemplation, reflecting on ideas that are mind-changing. And then there is kavana, which is focus. How do I direct my intention in my daily practice. Okay, so those are kind of the general ideas that we'll be covering. Hispodidus, hisponenus, and kavana. This week, we're going to talk about how to overcome some practices that we might employ in order to overcome negative feelings and emotions and create more positivity. Next week, we'll be talking about, with Hashem's help, the meaning of spirituality and how we can meditate to experience spirituality. In our third class, we hope to learn the depth that Jewish meditation adds to mindfulness to help us to become more present and more fully in the moment. In each moment, we'll talk about some Jewish teachings about living in the moment, and then we'll reflect on how that might change the way we orient ourselves in the world. In our fourth class, we'll be talking about bringing meditation to life, how we might see all of our life as a meditative practice. In our fifth class, we'll talk about bringing our awareness to the presence of God that is all around us, and how that can be a profound driver of joy in our life. And finally, in our last class, we'll talk about the symbiotic relationship between meditation and action, and how the more we meditate, the way in which we meditate affects the way in which we act, and the way in which we act will then in turn affect the way we meditate. But so that's the big picture.
And the name of this course is?
Meditation from Sinai is the name of the course. The idea is that it's Jewish traditions of meditation.
David Off-White teaches meditation. Do you know him?
Yes. This is a lot simpler than some of the major meditation teachers that are out there. I really wanted to focus. Okay, we'll see how this goes. We'll see. Let's take a moment to think about what we might accomplish through meditation. Okay. So one of the things that people seek to accomplish through meditation is to reduce stress, right? To be more calm, to deal with our negative emotions. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So let's take a moment to think. I could just invite you to take a moment and just think back, maybe to remember something, an uncomfortable experience that you had in the last month. Can you think of an uncomfortable experience that you had in the last month? Remember something uncomfortable? How about my Zoom people? Some of you had COVID. That was uncomfortable. Yeah.
A week before vacation, I made everybody comfortable because I couldn't take it anymore. Everybody.
Okay. So if we could just direct our attention to that. So now think to yourself about the impact that uncomfortable feeling had in your life, right? Being uncomfortable might have led to being in a bad mood. What did being in a bad mood do to us, right? What was it like to be me in a bad mood? And how did that impact my life, right? So maybe I snapped at somebody, I lost my temper, I made a decision that I shouldn't have made, I maybe ate more ice cream or more chocolate than I otherwise would have, right? Okay. So in addition to being stressed, there are also real consequences to having negative emotions in our lives. We want to recognize that this is important as well. It's not just how we feel, we also affect the world around us with our moods. And so it's important. This is important as Jews, as or in more broadly, as people seeking to be servants of God. Our mood is very important in our service, in being a servant of God, because it's very hard to spread light when we're struggling with inner darkness. Indeed, some of you may know that I'm also a chaplain. I'm not a military chaplain. I serve as a hospital chaplain. But the Torah actually describes the role of a military chaplain. It's on page 8, text 3. This is as the soldiers approach a battlefield. As you approach the battle, says the Torah, the Kohen, the priest, shall come near and speak to the people. He shall say to them, Shema Yisrael. So there's a hint right there, right? Shema Yisrael, hear O Israel. Right before I said that Shema Yisrael, hear O Israel, is a meditation, right? That's why we sit. In this case, I don't think they sat. But in any case, he says, hear Israel, today you are approaching the battle against your enemies. Do not be discouraged. Do not be afraid. Do not be alarmed or terrified because of them. Okay. So we understand that this is an important thing to wish for, that a soldier would not be afraid, discouraged, or anxious, because it's very hard to be effective on the battlefield if you're not feeling confident. So, but the question is, what good is that? What good is it to tell somebody who's about to go into battle, don't be afraid, right? In my worldview anyway, until I learned more about this, it seemed like a very unhelpful and even annoying or even counterproductive thing to say to somebody. Don't feel what you might be feeling. And certainly in our modern popular psychology, all feelings are okay, right? So if we're telling somebody not to feel something, we should consider the possibility that there is a practice which these people understood that they had to employ in order to not feel these things, or at least that the Torah understands that it is possible to tell somebody to not feel something. How is it possible to tell someone not to feel something? Right? So how might we try and deal with negative feelings that we have?
But I don't think that's, and I actually know a military chaplain.
Yes.
I don't think it's so much telling someone not to feel,
Yeah.
but to know that you're not alone.
Okay. So telling the soldiers in this case, do not fear, tells them you're not alone. This is a normal thing to feel. People feel this. Yes? Okay.
Could he speak a little louder, Rabbi?
I knew that he wouldn't hear it, which is why I repeated it, and also wanting to make him feel heard, but I wanted you to hear it as well. Did you hear that did you hear what I said? Yeah? Okay. Yes, go ahead, Raman.
I wanted to say that it's a pep talk from coaches. Even Yeshua said, "Chazak v'amatz." Okay, it's the same kind of thing.
It's like a pep talk. Yeah.
So
Joshua.
So focus on something else though too. It's like you're not gonna be concerned and feel something else. What that does is it opens up your bandwidth. You can feel something else, right? Or you can focus on something else. So if you're going into battle, you be focusing on the battle.
Right.
Focusing on being afraid.
You wouldn't, which it's really important to not be afraid, because that takes away your bandwidth from being able to focus in the battlefield. It's really important.
You're looking for replacement.
Right. Okay. So that's
So
spoiler alert.
yeah, I don't want
It's not meditation, but it is a focus.
Yes. Correct. Correct. Any of our online Yidden want to chime in with ways in which you deal with negative feelings? We have a silent.
maybe you feel where there's things you can't do, and then you go ahead and do them on purpose, just to do them.
Right.
It's,
So choosing to do something
you know.
when other things, when we're faced with a feeling of helplessness, choosing something that I can do might help deal with the negativity around my helplessness.
Yeah, I was also told by someone, don't make a note, do this, do that, just go ahead and do it. Rather than saying, do this.
Very nice.
Right.
The other
Ask for help if you're overwhelmed.
Ask for help if you're overwhelmed. Good. John, what are you saying?
also being a part of a bigger thing. So if I'm feeling sad or upset or something like that, understanding that, well, one, hopefully it's temporary, but second, you know, there are other people that are relying on you, that you're part of a larger group.
So the feeling of responsibility.
Okay, you know.
So you're saying that there's really two parts. One is the fact that you're not alone in this, but also, so there's solace, but also the feeling of a sense of duty and responsibility. Ain't nobody got time for this. Yeah. I have one. So I heard this one from Abe. He says he read in the Times that the way to achieve inner peace is to finish all the things that he started. So what did he do? He found a bottle of red wine that he started, finished it. Found a bottle of white wine that he started, finished it. Bottle of whiskey, tub of ice cream, all of them started, finished them. He's great.
Till the following morning.
Yes, till the following morning. Yes. Okay. So let's talk about the Kabbalah of Consciousness. Okay. Let's see if we can. I don't know if you'll be able to get my board here. No, you wouldn't be able to see my board. Well, this is one of the perks of being here in person. Where's my? Yeah. Okay. We have. Can you see this over there? Yeah, you can see it. Okay. So we have in Kabbalistic teaching about the psyche, about the human consciousness, we talk about two domains. There is the powers called kochot. Okay, pardon my handwriting. And then there is the levushim, or garments. Okay, so we have kochot and levushim, powers and garments. Okay, the powers are divided into, the powers are the 10 sephirot, which some of you may be familiar with, but more broadly, they are, the 10 sephirot are divided into two categories. We'll just focus on the two categories. We have intellect and emotion. Okay, intellect and emotion. These are the powers, these are the kochot. In a sense, all of what it is, right, in simple English, all of what it is to be a human being, the human experience is either an intellectual or emotional experience, right? And everybody has a different mix of their emotional and of the 10 sephirot. Some people will be more dominant, more strong in one emotion, will be more driven by one emotion. Other people will be more driven by another emotion. Some people will have an intellectual bent that leans more to chokhmah, and other people will have them maybe more curious or creative, and you have other people whose intellectual bent is more analytical or meditative, contemplative, right? That's the Bina people, okay? For example, right? So the kochot define our personality, they shape our identity and how we, what type of person we are, okay? These are the kochot, the powers, the intellect and the emotion. And then we have the levushim, the garments, okay? The garments are our actions and our speech. Nobody say anything else. Don't give it away if you know it. Okay, so our speech and our actions are the ways in which we express our kochot. So if a person, for example, is particularly driven by the emotion of chesed, of love, right? So they would be expressing their love in actions and in speech. Yes, straightforward. It's kind of like if you think about if I have an emotional story that I want to write, the paper that I write it on would be the garment, the interface, the method of communicating that experience that I'm having, or that personality trait that I have. They're called garments because we can take them off and put them on. We can choose to act or choose not to act. We could choose to speak or choose not to speak. We could choose to speak about one of our kochot. We can choose to express one of our soul powers in words or actions, or we can choose to express a different one of our soul powers in words or actions. Yes, Robin.
Just backtrack. You're giving the 10 different sefirot now?
No. Chochmah, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchut. Okay? That's your 10 sefirot. That's your powers. The intellect is here.
That's the zero.
And this is the emotions. Okay? And this is the emotions. This is the Zeran pin. Okay? Okay?
And that side?
This is the Zeran pin here.
And
This is the garments.
that have-
Garments are the modes of expression of our personality. Okay? I don't want to get too into the Kabbalistic weeds here. I just want to, because what I want to talk about now is thought. Okay? Which column would you put thought in? Would you put thought into the powers, the intellect, and the emotion? Or would you put thought into the garments with the speech and the action? Huh? You say Aristotle and Plato. Machlekes. This is the famous Machlekes Aristotle and Plato. Okay, yeah. What do you say, Christian? You would say that the thought goes with the powers. And you agree. How about our virtual participants? If you show me a hand, if you say thought goes with powers, with your intellect and your emotions. Show me a hand if you think that thought goes with the garments. Okay, so we got in the room, people are leaning more towards the powers. Online, people are leaning more towards the garments. The answer is
Thought generates speech, you know that. And
yes,
action.
yes, yes, yes. So the answer is that thought is one of the soul garments. And this is really important. It's important that we clarify this. And the reason why we get tripped up is because I said the word intellect. And so when we say intellect or even emotions, we immediately associate that with thoughts. The problem is, or the difference is, that thoughts are nothing more than the words you tell yourself about the things you feel. So how we feel about things. For example, I like chicken. I like chicken is a fact. Okay, I don't really like chicken that much. Let's go with beef. Okay, I like beef, right? I like beef is a fact. That is a product of my kochot, let's say. It's actually not, but let's say theoretically, it's a product of my kochot. It's a product of my personality, right? I like music is more likely a product of my personality. Okay, let's say I like music as a product of my personality. Now, thinking the thought about how much I like music is not my personality. It is a garment that I'm currently putting on, because I could be thinking about how much I like music, or I could be thinking about how much I like beef. And that's a garment that I took off and I put on. I put on the beef garment, the thought about beef garments, and then I took it off and I put on the thought about music. And I could do the same thing with my words. I could say to you, I like beef. And then I can say to you, I also like music. They are revealing my kochot. They are revealing my soul powers, but they are not. Those words, just like the thoughts, are not themselves my soul powers. And with action, we understand this much more clearly, that people do things that, sometimes they represent the totality of who we are, sometimes they don't. And we can represent different parts of the totality of who we are in different actions. And it's a garment that you can put on or take off.
I'm gonna say something.
You can say something.
Fine. Music is intangible. It preys on your emotions. It has a power of changing the way you feel internally. Okay, so it's totally different.
I don't want to get caught up on that. It's a true point that you're saying, but
It's only
hold on. It's the point is I want to focus on thoughts, okay? Because I want to learn about how our thoughts work. So the music was just an example. The chicken was just an example. The point is that thought is we often don't realize this unless we've been taught this, that our thoughts are something that we choose to do or not choose to do, right? So I could say our thoughts are something that we potentially choose to do. Okay. Now, so this is the thing. Can we change, when you say change our mind, that's an important, we have to choose those words very specifically, because that's how we get tripped up into the thoughts versus intellect. Changing our mind means I no longer like jazz. Now I like classical. I changed my mind, right? That's going into the powers level and changing my actual orientation, my inner orientation. I am a person who likes jazz. I change my orientation and I start liking classical, right? But I can, instead of, that's very hard to do. Very, very hard to do that. Maybe even impossible. But what I can do is I can think about jazz music or think about classical music. I can change the things I think about. Instead of thinking about how much I like jazz, I can not think about how much I like jazz. So in doing that, I have changed my mind. I haven't changed my mind, but I've stopped thinking about it.
Invert your negative thoughts.
Yeah. Yes, you can invert your thoughts from something negative to something constructive, positive, and that is where we're going here with this. Okay, so what I'd like to do is I'd like to practice this for a moment, and just we'll work through this and we'll experience a little bit about what it might be to change our mind, not change our mind, but change our thoughts. Okay, so I should really be sitting, but that would be awkward because I'd go off screen. So I will, if you'd like to, I invite you to join me as I guide you through this meditation. Sit comfortably. Take a few deep breaths. And doesn't matter if it's in through the nose or out through the mouth, just breathe deeply. Allow yourself to relax. If you feel comfortable to close your eyes, you can gently allow your eyes to rest closed. And in the silence, become aware of the flow of your thoughts. What thoughts are flowing through your mind? What thoughts are being projected onto the screen of your consciousness? If you can choose one thought, see if you can identify a feeling that comes as a result of that thought. I have this thought. What is the feeling that goes along with that thought? I'd like to take you back, I'd like to invite you to take yourself back to a moment in time when you might have been embarrassed. If you can think about that particular moment of embarrassment. Not too traumatic, please. Just a minor incident where you felt embarrassed or uncomfortable. Try to picture the place, the people. Now pay attention to how your body feels in that moment as you bring yourself back. What does it feel like? How is your emotions? What are the physical sensations you associate with that experience? And now let's switch that thought and think back to a time when you were so happy. A moment in life when you felt real overwhelming joy. Remember the moment. Where were you? Picture it in your mind. Who was there? Remember the sounds. What does it feel like? What are the emotions? What is the emotional experience in the body? Now, where did that image of embarrassment of a few moments ago disappear to? The feelings went away, and even our physical sensations changed now that new thoughts were brought into the consciousness of the mind. So we could try that again. Think back to a time when you might have hurt yourself, you might have tripped or stubbed your toe. Remember that feeling? What does it feel like to remember that? You can even picture the complex feelings that go along with that, the emotional reaction, or some of the consequences that you might have felt in that moment. Maybe even the negative consequences that you pictured in your mind at the time. Now, think back to a party that you attended, or a happy occasion, or a moment in which you heard a funny joke. Think back to that moment. You remember the story? Was there cake at the party? What does it feel like? Is some of that happiness that you had in that moment recreated and brought back into your mind? Again, the feelings of hurt from a few minutes ago are gone, and instead we have happiness. You changed your thoughts, and your physical sensations and emotional experience changes. So this is an important lesson. Moach shalit al halev. The mind determines the outcomes of the emotions. Change your mind, change your feelings. Shift your thoughts, you feel better. You're feeling down or depressed, you can change your thoughts. And in doing so, your whole emotional makeup transforms in the same moment. The tension and negativity goes away, you feel lighter and brighter. Let's stay a moment in the happy place. And when you feel comfortable too, you can allow your eyes to open and rejoin us in the room. So one of the things that how was that, guys? Is that wild? Time travel. More important than time travel, psychic travel. We traveled not only in our mind, but more importantly, we traveled in our experiences, in our emotions. And again, it may be impossible to erase the difficult, painful moments that we've had, but we can choose when we want to think about them. That's point one. Point two is as Robin, as you said earlier, our thoughts, our speech comes from our thoughts. But even more deeply than that, one of the things that we discovered in this meditation is that our feelings often come from our thoughts. So we might have an opinion, and out of that opinion will come a feeling. Classic example. I was visiting somebody in the hospital a couple years back. This story stays with me. And as I was driving up to the hospital, a car cut ahead of me. And I immediately got angry. What a nerve to cut ahead of somebody. Such rude driver, didn't signal, and then as we're pulling up to the parking lot, I could see the person in the lane next to me in the parking lot. And I saw a middle-aged woman crying her eyes out. And in this moment, my anger disappeared and I'm filled with compassion. She must have been so upset. She must have been just distracted, something, who knows, coming to a hospital. We can imagine all the circumstances in which this person is completely distracted and not able to focus on the road. And then I can go back and have another thought. Well, maybe they should have taken an Uber if they're so distracted and can't. Again, all of a sudden, my thought changed and my emotional thing changes. And I begin to get judgmental and begin to get angry and that. Or I can be compassionate. So our emotions largely are directly downstream from our thoughts. And this is what is indicated in text 5 on page 13. The mind naturally controls the heart, or as we put it during our meditation, our thoughts determine the outcomes of our emotions. Humans were created from birth with the ability to exercise willpower to control the drives of our hearts so that they not be expressed in our behavior, speech, or thoughts. We are able to divert our attention completely from things our heart crave to something entirely different. Here, in chapter 12 of Tanya, the Baal HaTanya is giving advice about how to deal with people who suffer from problematic urges and cravings. And he says, the problem is not your problematic urges and cravings. It's normal to have problematic urges and cravings. Instead, he says, But that you don't have power over. You don't have power over what you crave. What you do have power over is how much you think about your cravings. And so we can at any time choose to divert our mind to think about something else. And in order to be able to do this effectively, it helps to have a regular practice of thinking intentionally, of practicing doing the kind of thing that we describe, thinking about something that I choose to think about. Just practice thinking about something that I choose to think about, not reacting with my thoughts, but thinking intentionally. And doing this can help overall to, it can help us overall to be more, to hone that muscle of mindfulness that we need in order to move away from negative thoughts, negative emotions, to more positive thoughts, more positive emotions. Again, the issue itself, the problem won't go away, but we don't have to let the problem express itself all the time. Comments, questions, thoughts?
I think it goes to, does the heart control the thoughts?
Do the thoughts control the heart or the heart control the thoughts? This is a good question.
You have to be in control.
The answer is that, exactly as you said, you have to be in control. That is, when we think intentionally, really it can go both ways, right? For example, I can feel hungry. I have a physical, it starts with a physical sensation, or a physiological, what's the word I'm looking for? A physiological event, okay? And what happens is that generates a desire, a craving, and a thought follows that, right? That exists. That's a thing that happens. And sometimes we can have experiences like me when I'm driving in the car, and my history causes my mind to automatically jump to a judgmental and angry thought. And this is influenced by my nature and my nurture, okay? It's reactionary thinking. But there is that, while that is true, the potential is also there in the reverse, that I can choose. For example, has it ever happened to you that you were really hungry, but you started watching a video on YouTube and forgot how hungry you were? Or young men, I would say, playing a video game and he forgot that he's hungry? Happens all the time, right?
You're not going to run into a building if you're working strictly.
You're not going to run into a building if you're
running on just straight intellectual thought. Like if I have to think it through, that's where emotion will tend to kick in.
That could be a positive circumstance.
Or even empathy is not one of those things I'm going to process.
Well,
with.
one of the things I learned in psychology in college many years ago was during World War II, there were many stomach injuries. And these men who had virtually lost their stomachs still developed hunger at the same time every day. And that's strictly thought controlling their feelings. And I think generally if a person is constantly angry, is constantly has vehement thoughts, he's going to be ill because his body can't deal with it as on a permanent nature.
So Elliot, as you're saying that there is a physiological impact to thinking harmful, painful, uncomfortable thoughts. And John was saying before, if I got you correctly, that that there is a reason, there's a benefit to this reactionary thinking that we have, when we act on instinct, that can sometimes be a helpful thing. We can protect ourselves from danger, right? Or to use a different example, if a car comes unexpectedly, I jump out of the way. I'm afraid. I don't think about it first. I react, right? If I had to think first and notice that, right? But okay, now, so let's reserve that for a moment. Let's go to text 6 and we'll come back to this idea, okay? Now, I just want to use one more example about this idea of thinking intentionally and thinking reactionarily, okay? And I want to just refer back to the meditation practice that we did a few moments ago, okay? So if you just remember that moment a few moments ago, what did we do in the beginning? I said, take a few deep breaths, okay? Why do we breathe when we meditate? Why is it important to breathe when we meditate? So first of all, I'll tell you that it's in the Torah. We say in the Kiddush, in the Shabbos morning Kiddush, Ki sheishis yamim aso Hashem es hashamayim ve'es ha'aretz uvayom hashvi'i shavas vayinofash. For 6 days God made the heavens and the earth, and on the 7th he shavas, he rested, vayinofash, and he was refreshed. This is the classic translation. Another translation of these words are shavas, pause, vayinofash, and breathe. Shavas, vayinofash, pause and breathe. Right, because to rest means to stop. And vayinofash means to be refreshed, but it also has the word nefesh, which means breathing, right? Yes. Right. So this is my comment. I had to bring this makor, I had to bring this Torah source, right? That the idea of stopping and breathing is alluded to in Jewish teaching. But just on a more practical basis, there's something remarkable about breathing, which is that breathing, as Rav Aryeh Kaplan points out, is something that we do automatically. And so we breathe without thinking. It's part of our, parasympathetic nervous system, autonomic nervous system, autonomic response, right? But the thing about breathing is that that our emotional state is mirrored in our breathing. So if we get nervous or anxious, our breath quickens. And when we're feeling comfortable, relaxed, our breathing slows down. So our breathing is actually not only connected to our physiological system, it's also connected to our emotional system, right? So that's the first thing about the breath, which is, by the way, why, they do in lie detectors. They put a cord across the chest to monitor the breathing, because
it enhances when you're lying.
Right, the breathing changes if a person is anxious, right? So but the other thing about breathing is that we can, while the breathing, when we're not paying attention to it, the breathing follows our emotions. When we are paying attention to it, the breathing can follow our intentions. So we can be anxious, but slow down our breath. Or we can be calm and we can quicken our breath. So it's a great entryway into, if you think about the relationship between our thoughts and our breath, goes normally in one direction. Our emotional experience goes in one direction. If we're nervous, we breathe quickly. But the same is true in the reverse, that when we breathe slowly, we actually calm down. We stimulate the vagus nerve, and that has a physiological response. It actually calms us down in a physical sense, but it also helps to remind us that we can control, we have some control, we have some autonomy over our responses.
It's called 5 cleansing breaths to begin, and if you think about the word, very few people know how to breathe appropriately. Comes with the diaphragm.
We're not getting into that.
You sing, so you should be
I do. I did study breathing techniques. Yeah.
But a cleansing breath is not a short, rapid, follicular breath that originates only from this part of the larynx, goes from the bottom.
Yeah, we're getting top-notch stuff. You're here, you're getting the advanced stuff. No JLI course in the world is getting this. Okay.
I'm sorry, you know what they say, it's no good to know some knowledge, right?
Okay, let's look at a teaching by the Tzemach Tzedek of Labavich.
Too much knowledge is dangerous.
This is a text 6, page 14, was a letter written by the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe of Labavich, who lived in the 1820s. Tzemach Tzedek was born in 1789 and he passed away in 1866. And the third Rebbe of Labavich, the grandson of the Baal HaTanya. He had a mechutin. What is a mechutin? How do you say mechutin in English? There's no such word. His daughter, huh?
Brother-in-law.
No,
Brother.
mechutin, no.
No, in-laws,
Yeah, yeah.
in-laws.
It was his in-law in the sense that his son married this fellow's daughter, right? The English word in-laws is it's not the same. So the Tzemach Tzedek's son married a daughter of a man named Rabbi Shlomo Freitas. You could imagine Rabbi Shlomo Freitas. The Rebbe's son doesn't marry anyone from any ordinary family. This was from the creme de la creme of the community. In the late 1820s, Rabbi Shlomo Freitas wrote a letter to the Tzemach Tzedek saying that he's suffering from anxiety, fears in his hearts. And he was talking about his prayer work and how he was asking God to remove his anxiety. And the Tzemach Tzedek wrote back a fascinating response, criticizing him for relying only on prayer. And he provided a practical technique to overcome this mental struggle that he had, based on what we've learned, and we'll see it inside. Text 6, starting on page 14. He says, even if we're emotionally afraid, we are able to divorce our thought, speech, and action from that emotion. The essential thing is not to contemplate or discuss the fear at all, but to do the perfect opposite. Immediately upon letting go of the thought entirely, the fear will dissolve on its own. Now, I insert my comment over here. We aren't saying that the fear is no longer something to be afraid of, but like we did in the meditation practice, when you think about something else, the fear is not there anymore. It's there, but it's not there. At the very least, it will become instantly dormant and not felt in the body. And here's the thing, Robin, that you were alluding to before. Over the course of several days, it will completely dissolve to the point that it won't enter our mind at all. We kind of diminish that neural pathway. It becomes less and less of an issue. Removal of the thought leads to the dissipation of the fear, in this case, the emotion, because emotions are entirely reliant upon intellectual focus, upon dat, for their existence. An example of, in this case, I would say, the anxiety stems from the concern, right? Thinking concerned thoughts heightens the anxiety. You can't be concerned when you're not thinking concerning thoughts. And the more we think concerning thoughts, the stronger our anxiety becomes. Therefore, by removing our thought from the matter, the intellectual power, the dat, in this case, the concern, is withdrawn from the emotion. The concern is no longer attached to the emotion, no longer drives the emotion in the same way, and now the emotion ceases to be activated. It's worth training yourself, says the Tzemach Tzedek, to remove all negativity. For we must remove ourselves from all fear, including justifiable fear, as I wrote. This is certainly true in your case where there is nothing to worry about whatsoever, thank God, in terms of your health and financial situation. Tzemach Tzedek knows Rabbi Freitas very well, and he knows that he's doing well. This is just, he's suffering from major fears about minor issues. So he says, you're well, Baruch Hashem. So this is not we're not dealing with the logistical problem here. We're dealing with an emotional problem here.
It's best, maybe the best definition of ever heard of fear. I'm not talking about
Panic, not panic, but fear.
Fear is an irrational thought of something that has not happened.
Not happened yet. Yep. Fear is worrying about something which hasn't happened yet. Yeah.
I didn't come up with
Yes. Yeah.
somebody who told me
That was me. I told you that. I told you that. Okay. So again, if we're consciously aware of the fact that we're thinking something, we can stop thinking about what we don't want to think about, cutting off the flow, right? Cutting off the life force to that emotion. And then without the garment of thought, let's say this is the thing that we're expressing. Well, in this case, he was actually talking about this one. Without the garment of thought, this one doesn't become expressed. And it's no longer active.
That is what? Intellect?
This is dot. Dot is connection to an idea. So back to the breath. The breath is a trigger to taking a system that's normally reactionary and making it intentional. So it helps. It's a helpful tool to driving ourselves from the physical experience into the mind and the heart, where we then go from once we've started doing that physically. It's interesting. We go from we're starting from the lowest of the garments, from the actions, the Maisa, and we're going up to the thought. We're starting with the action, then we're going to the thought, and then we're going into the emotion, and then into the intellect, right?
is the breath almost like an internal pep talk?
You might say the breath is a pep talk, or a trigger, or a portal, or I like to think of it more in terms of a trigger. Yeah. And he goes on to say, the Baal Tanya does. And by the way, the thing is, this is very important. What he's saying here is because one of the big problems, and I recently had a conversation with somebody who is suffering from anxiety, and I want to say that anxiety can be, when we talk about anxiety, there's clinical anxiety and there's just anxious thoughts, right? But, we should always try the least invasive help before we go to the more serious things. The problem, this is the pattern that this person described to me. I'm having anxious thoughts. And then I think to myself, this is a really unhelpful thought to think. I ought to stop thinking about this. This is bad. And what does that do? It just creates a cycle of negativity and anxiety, right? So when we're talking about minor problematic thoughts, the trick is to not have that thought. This is a bad thought to have. And instead, take a deep breath and have something else to think about, right? And that might take some work, right? And we might find ourselves floating back and forth, but that's the process, right? The floating back and forth, that's the process. But every time we float away, every time we push ourselves away, we are re-stimulating, we're strengthening another thought process, and we're diminishing, right, that problematic thought process. And we'll talk in a future class about other kind of more advanced thinking processes that we can train ourselves over time, which would help address these issues. Okay, and then he goes into, in text 7, he goes on to be more explicit about the practice. He says, your primary method of removing worrying thoughts from your mind is by redirecting your mind towards other matters. You can replace them with thoughts of necessary material matters that bring you joy. I would say, having read the Hebrew, I would say, you could replace them with positive, useful thoughts that bring you joy. Remember, he's speaking here to a rabbi, right? You can contemplate God's Torah that delights the heart. And this is not to say that this is not for the ordinary person, but this is a person who conceivably had a wallet full, a backpack full of Torah thoughts that he could access. But even to this Rav, the Tzemach Tzedek says, the latter, being able to contemplate God's Torah that delights the heart, is best achieved through creating a fixed schedule of daily Torah study, which is particularly effective with a study partner. Right? One can make a fixed time every day, or a commitment to read something every day from a Torah book as a way of building up an arsenal of ideas that we can grab onto when we need them. But definitely much more effective is having somebody that you read to and who reads back to you, and then you can discuss the idea and what it's meaningful. Even if it's just, I have a number of study partners that I study with, peers, in addition to like people that I learn with, but as a rabbi, but I have peers that I learn with. And in some of those sessions, we're learning quite complex things, and it requires discussion. Another one of my peers, my study partners, we're studying very simple halachas, just reviewing them. And we simply read them to each other back and forth. We each go back and forth. We read one halacha to the other. And just having read it to somebody reinforces it in the mind. Again, it's like I'm employing all of my garments, my thought, my speech, and my action as a way of stronger reinforcing it in myself. So this is a way of kind of filling up my storehouse with positive, helpful things that I can think about. Okay.
So the question then becomes, okay, so if I'm using that as a means to preoccupy my mind from those negative thoughts, are you then saying I can use what I learned, let's say today, and say, okay, I'm going to use that as a potential replacement for the negative thoughts, say the Shema or some halacha that I learned, so that something creeps into my mind to say, hey, listen, it's not so bad,
Saying
I learned this new thing. I mean, I don't know.
Right. Good. So let's get practical for a moment, okay? So I'll say what we want to do practically as an overall practice. So we'll say kind of our systems approach. And then I also want to talk about our acute approach, what happens in that moment, right? So what you said was excellent. Just think about something that we learned, thinking the Shema, right? Or remembering a joke, right? It doesn't have to necessarily be so high. It has to work for you, right? So as we said before, being in a bad mood is not good in our work as being godly servants. So if it's not going to be a Torah thought, at least let it not be a negative thought, right? At least let it not be a harmful, painful a thought that pulls me down, right? So if that's all you can pull up right then and there is a funny joke or some random thought or whatever, day at the beach, right? Go to your happy place, right? Take a few breaths, picture yourself in your happy place. That can be, just focusing on the breathing, count the number of seconds, right? We'll do a little bit of that in a moment. That's the acute practice in the moment. Shema Yisrael, right? We could just say like that, right? Okay, that's the acute practice. And then there's the consistent system practice in which we train ourselves, take a time, few moments every day, and we'll talk about some options, what that is. We have only 5 minutes left, so I want to go straight to there. The appendix, for those who want to do some learning on their own, the appendix, appendix A on page 25, talks about 3 approaches to to the pause before prayer that the Hasidim Arishonim engaged in. Okay, but I want to go now. Is this? Can I borrow your book a second, Christian?
An hour says.
Yes, it was for an hour.
Maybe there's a shul down in Manhattan where they do yoga before we rise so that they open up the chakra.
Feels like a stretch to me.
I think it would
Rather than things you know something like that.
Okay, in the book, page 29. It feels like a stretch to me, Robin. Yoga before davening.
I didn't do it, but I know that. I was never-
She didn't get the punch.
There's 7 chakras in the body from the bottom to
Yes.
the top.
We're going to talk about this. Let's do exactly this, okay? We're going to talk, if you have page 30, right, Christian? We're on page 30?
29.
Page 29, okay.
Oh,
So,
you said an hour, so that's an hour.
yes. You know what? I'm all for that. I'm all for it. Stretching before davening is a good idea. Again, remember, as we said in the beginning, sitting comfortably, removing distractions, all of these things are important. And so, yeah, a stretch can help open up the body and make me feel more comfortable. Look,
Receptive.
more receptive, more open.
Stretch before they come to Tephila.
Some do. Yeah.
I think
There's
people
at
see
least
themselves
one.
going, okay, we're gonna stretch for 10 minutes before we start.
Yeah,
Tephila."
it's a good thing to do. It's a good thing to do. Yeah, there's at least one,
There's
two
at least
probably.
one.
Two probably.
I do it at my-
I think they would think you're the coolest rabbi in there.
Oh, you mean like get up and like?
Actually,
Not in shul. Oh no, not in shul, but at home before. Yeah, people do.
do that stuff.
Okay, let's talk about a meditation process. Okay.
Yeah, chair yoga, it's a thing.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so a little bit of breath practice. You can close your eyes if you like. Find a comfortable sitting position. Take a deep breath in. Feel the cool air entering your nostrils. Feel how warm it is on the way out. Cool on the way in, warm on the way out. Notice your shoulders going up, chest expanding. Breathe in, shoulders go up, chest expands. Breathe out, shoulders sag. Paying attention to that breath, we begin to take control of our mind. Our mind wanders. That's okay. We return to intentional consciousness. Okay, now we're ready to daven, the morning brachas. On page 29, the first bracha that we say in the morning, blessed are you, God, King of the universe, who grants the rooster understanding to distinguish between day and night. And so we take a breath and we become aware simply of our consciousness. We are conscious beings. We think. Everything that we are is determined by our thoughts. On the most basic level, this is the ability to distinguish between light and dark, day and night. We open our eyes and we notice the fact that we're able to see. What a wonder it is to be able to see. We stretch the limbs, let ourselves feel our body, paying attention to our arms, to our legs, feeling in our mind. We are aware of our fingers and our toes. Matir asurim, we control our movements. You can wiggle your fingers a little bit as you say this. The next bracha is sitting up. Blessed are you, Hashem, who straightens those who are stooped. And we can just become aware of our posture. We are homo erectus. We stand up straight. We feel our shoulders stacked above our waist. And if we're sitting, we notice our feet, we notice our buttocks on the chair, our thighs, we are upright. What a wonder it is. I can stand upright. I feel my clothing on my skin. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam malbish harumim, who clothes the naked. I take a breath and I feel the energy buzzing in my body. This one takes a little moment. You gotta calm, relax. You can feel the blood flow sometimes. You can feel your heartbeat. You can feel your body buzzing a little bit. Blessed are you, God, who gives strength to the weary. Our feet are on the ground. Blessed are you, God, King of the universe, who spreads the earth upon the water. We feel ourselves on solid ground. At this point, our meditation becomes a little bit more complex. We enter into the higher human mind. We pay attention to our journey of life. What we have done that has brought us to this day, and that going forward in this day, destiny will guide us. Blessed are you, God, who guides the steps of people. The next bracha, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam she'asa li kol tzarki. Blessed are you, God, King of the universe, who has provided me with all my needs. This relates to, in the most specific example, this relates to our shoes. But in the more broad sense, it relates to the modern conveniences of life. I am aware of the gifts of the modern conveniences of life. The next bracha, blessed are you, God, King of the universe, who girds Israel with might. I am aware of my identity. I am aware of the belt that I wear around my waist. Who I am in the world. This is, of course, a morning meditation. And so I'm directing my thoughts, not just to start out getting into my body, becoming aware of myself, and now reaching out into the more broad sense of who I am. And Oter Yisrael b'sifara, blessed are you, God, who crowns Israel with glory. The fact that I have this identity and this mission gives me a glorious relationship with God. And that's how we start davening in the morning. So it takes a few minutes. This tradition actually is, this meditation is traditionally done standing, by the way. Even though the original prescription of this process was to be said in bed, starting out lying in bed. As we wake up in the morning, becoming aware of our consciousness, as we open our eyes, becoming aware of the gift of sight, as we're able to first take control over our movements, right? So in ancient times, that's how this was practiced. Indeed, Rambam says that that's what we should do. The reason we don't do that is because generally, since we're reciting blessings here with God's name, we don't do that when we have to go to the bathroom, while we still haven't removed distractions, right? That's another example of a halacha of removing distractions in prayer. So we do it generally either at home before leaving the house or in the Ashkenazi tradition in the synagogue. In the synagogue, it's recited standing, and I think it's also helpful, since this is about getting into our body, there's a value to saying this standing, because it's easier to kind of feel those feelings of the ground, the stack of my posture, my ability to move, feeling the room around me, feeling my clothing. All of that is an experience that is benefited by standing. You know, there's also walking meditation and things like that. These are old practices as well that kind of align somewhat with this. So again, so this is the systems approach, where every day we start out the day with a few brief moments of conscious thinking. And then from time to time during the day, it's recommended also just to take a few moments here and there to take a breath. I'm in the car, stopped at a red light. I'm in an elevator. I started doing this recently. In the elevator, have a few minutes in the elevator. I meditate until I get to the top floor, right? Just take that moment to choose what I'm going to think about rather than let my mind control my life. Let my smell roses or whatever, right? Right. But the idea is to let my awareness be guided rather than reacting. And then when we have those moments where we're having a negative experience, we have that tool that has been honed and practiced. So I promise you, in the course of a few days of doing this, you'll see yourself getting better at it.
I think the other byproduct to get from mindfulness is you're actually even more attuned. Well, wait a second. What's really going on with you? What's really affecting that whole self-actualization concept?
Yes.
It's a psych term, but
Right.
I won't just say it. But the fact of the matter is, as you become more mindful, you're more attuned to your body. Like, wait a second, I'm a little off.
Right.
I
Yes,
need
you
to
can
get
notice
myself
that.
right and get myself straight.
Right. So one of the things that I started noticing is I started noticing certain sensations, certain physical sensations that I have when I'm about to go in to speak with a certain person. I started to feel tightness in my chest, and I started to realize that. And I said, hey, that's a physical thing. I can breathe through that. You know, I don't need to pay attention to that. Just breathe through that. Think about something else. Try and, activate, or even just notice that and say, you know what, I'm nervous right now. But we're going to talk about, that's more advanced. What I wanted to focus on tonight is simply learning to separate between our ideas and our act of thinking, to identify thinking as an act that we choose to do intentionally. And we identified two practices. One, thinking about our happy place. Two, the breathing technique. And along with that, noticing how the morning prayer can be, the morning brachos can really be a nice guided meditation in the siddur to help us get into our bodies and be aware of, have a more intentional relationship with every aspect of our psyche, from the most core basic aspects of our just the fact that we notice things, onto our identity and our relationship with God. That's all I have to say. I'm happy to hear your questions or
I was
reactions.
thinking one more thing, which is really interesting with what you're talking about, is I never realized how often that whole went around. That was the
Yes.
this mindful thing.
Can we leave on there?
It's amazing how you're, as you get anxious and
Yes.
you hold your breath.
We hold our breath when we get anxious. Yeah, which is not good.
I never realized how much I did that until I started to do this, and I'm like, my gosh.
Right.
Which is really unhealthy.
Another thing that we realize when we start to breathe on purpose, especially for those of us who work on computers or who are hunched over phones, notice your breathing for a minute while you work on the computer. Your breath is much more shallow when you're hunched over, and even when you're concentrating on your work. Driving on. Yeah. So yeah, taking a moment, taking them from time to time, just remembering to, you might even set yourself an alarm, a reminder to breathe. That's helpful. But as servants of Hashem, as aspiring servants of Hashem, we want to not only breathe, but we want to take with us a divine thought, a godly thought. We can go back to those morning brachas and just, bless Hashem for the fact that we have modern conveniences. Feel the temperature of the air. You know what this is in the middle of the winter, to be in such a climate controlled environment? It's meshuga. It's crazy. All right. So we can just take moments to do things like that, just to feel our clothing and be grateful. Wow. It's a simple thing, but it's really, really helpful.
One more fact.